what was that? I think it was about time for me to add remote viewer into the mix of things that I can do, among other stuff. If you're not familiar with remote viewing, I'm going to discuss it here in this video. And perhaps there might be a little demonstration at the end if I have a willing participant in the live. So if you're new, what's up? How are you? Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, of course. We always have really fun and interesting discussions here on my channel. We do free spirit-led mediumship readings, of course, and on Mondays we have affirmations for fans and super fans, and on Wednesdays we have classes for mediumship and psychic development. If you're interested in those sort of things, make sure you hit the join button on my main page and come hang out with us. It's a lot of fun. Plus, you get access to other really cool videos that may premiere early or be just for fans and super fans. What's up, everybody? Nice to see you there. Welcome in. Come on in. It's your buddy Scotty. We're going to talk about remote viewing today. It has been heavily on my mind, to say the least. It has been something that I really, oh, look at my little ghost guy. All right, cool. It's been really something that's been on my mind lately, and I've been reading a lot about it. I've been digesting as much literature and as many podcasts about it as I can, because it is something that I'm realizing that I think a lot of you can do. Just like I talk about with the paranormal and mediumship and psychic abilities, I think that this is one of those things that many of you can do. So I'm going to say hello to some of my fans and super fans that have come in. Jerry, Destiny, Nicole, what's up? Wanty's World's in the house. Bev, nice to see you there. Chris and Amanda, hello. Lori and Shelly, nice to see you there. Tina, Verna, what's up? Penny, Nicole, Terry Swift, Dolores, Tracy, Michelle, Sylvia, and Jenny from the building. What's up? Hi, Barb and Samantha. Nice to see you there. So, for some of you who may not understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about remote viewing, it's just another term for using an ability that I think is pretty much built into most of us, but a lot of us don't know what it is or don't realize that we're accessing it when we're using it. And what good is it? So, I'm going to talk about it from a couple different aspects of my life, what it is according to other people, and what I think that we might be able to break it down as for each and every one of us on a daily basis. Okay. So if you're coming in and you're watching this on live, please do me a favor, hit the share button and let other folks know what we're up to. And if you are watching this on Team Replay, make sure you hit hashtag Team Replay down in the comment section so I know that you're there. If you have any questions about remote viewing as you come in, please feel free to ask them and I'll go through the questions and answer them as best I can. And if you're watching this on the replay, same thing. See if you can leave a comment and let me know what you think about it. So, hey, what's up, Haas? Nice to see you there. So, remote viewing, let's talk about it. Remote viewing is simply just the idea of sitting quietly somewhere. Okay, this is the most basic version of it. Okay, and there's all kinds, but this is going to be what we're talking about. So basically, it is the ability to sit somewhere, become meditative. So just be quiet in your own self and take a couple deep breaths and focus on a place or a person or a thing that is not in your general location. Okay, and what this allows us to do is, if we are free and open and honest with ourselves, is it will let us travel through space by just being open to the fact that we can do it. So, for instance, if I wanted to visit a specific mall in Milwaukee, perhaps I would sit here quietly, take a couple deep breaths, and I would just envision myself in Milwaukee at one of their malls. And perhaps I could take a walk around. Perhaps somebody who's been to a particular mall in Milwaukee would be able to say, like, as I'm talking to them about it, I'd be able to say, like, I'd be able to, like, so for instance, this is completely random, but I'm like, well, I don't know why, but the first thing that comes to mind when I'm talking about malls in Milwaukee is corn dogs. And for some reason, it seems like there might be a very popular mall in Milwaukee that is very well known for its the corn dog the corn dogs in their food court, or maybe they have a special location for it. I don't know. I'm just sort of winging it on that. So the idea that you can sit one place and mentally go somewhere else is a really neat concept to me. I can. So it's Nicole. You're right on with that. So I'm going to talk about that, and that's where we're going to start. So this is going to be a little bit of a personal journey too. This isn't the first time or the last. Well, it's the first time I'm going to talk about it like this from the beginning, but it won't be the last time because there's a lot to it. So when all of you were young children, do you ever remember sort of being free of your body or being able to like when you were going to sleep, still be able to get up and walk away from yourself and explore things that were not near where you were? Like, could you walk through your house freely without anybody knowing while you were still in bed? Does that make, if that makes sense to you, you might be onto something. And with that, you might have heard some sort of words like astral projection, right? But for me, that's very woo. It's very much like it's a cool term, so I know what you're talking about, but it's like one of those things where we should dial that back a little bit and let's just talk about a common idea that many of us have had and a common experience that many of us have had. So so Amanda says, when I was 10, I went to the bookstore down the road and found a book on astral projection. I taught myself how. So that is just the common idea of remote viewing. So let's just take the idea that that you would take your body basically and replicate it in spirit form and walk around, because that's how I understand sort of astral projection. And people talk about being able to fly through the air, which I don't think I've ever had that experience, but they talk about flying through the air, like phasing through walls and really interesting things like that. And I think when I think about those things, I think about my actual body separating, and I still sort of keep my form and do those things. And that seems so ghostly to me. And I want to separate the ghostly from the thing that we all do, okay? Or most of us do, okay? So we're gonna talk about and this is gonna get a little bit out. I promise you, it's gonna get a little bit out there, but it's gonna be very grounded because I'm a very grounded person, and this is a for me a very serious topic and discussion. So when we're talking about this, um, when I was little, I remember I got this really bad fever. I was a little kid. I was probably about 4 or 5, and I remember getting really sick. I had a really bad fever. I remember my mom having to put like cold washcloths on me, and I just remember being really sick. And it was the first time in my life at about that age when I formed a memory that wasn't a memory of me during the day. So during this fever, this strange time, I remember going to sleep and feeling like I was being lifted from my bed. Like I physically could feel, I felt like I was on a car ride, basically, but I still knew that I was in my room. And I felt lifted and I felt far away. And I remember I wasn't asleep and I wasn't dreaming. My eyes were just closed, but I was in such a crazy foreign place to me. I didn't understand what was happening, but I also wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared of the things that were happening. It was just a new experience, and it was better than being confined to this body that was sick and hot and uncomfortable. So I stayed in that space. Some people might say that I was disassociating, and some people in the medical field might be saying that I had a fever dream, which is interesting because what if disassociation and fever dreams are actually us, our spirits being able to pull away from our body to get away from trauma in moments where fight or flight isn't an option? What if it's fight, flight, or this other thing, this other disassociative thing that we can do, right? Think about that for a second. So, with that thought and flowing forward, what if when we are to the brink of our body being non functional anymore, either due to trauma or old age, the disassociation is so strong that our spirit permanently leaves our body, or our energy, our being, it leaves, and it leaves this body deceased. But all we've simply done is disassociate and pull away from the trauma that our body was encountering. So many times, old age is just a failure of our cells to regenerate quickly enough and be able to sustain a good life inside of this body, and our soul sort of knows that and can pull away, right? Or our being, our essence, whatever that is to you, can pull away and move from there, right? So just think about that for a moment, okay? Now, if we go back to the daily, right? So we are, many of us, very good at daydreaming and not being here when there are boring and mundane tasks happening. Not so much traumatic, but just boring, something that we don't want to be a part of. I'd like to say thank you to Melissa Contaldi for becoming a super fan. Thanks, Melissa. Welcome in. We appreciate you being here. So, um, let's go back to this idea of, when I was little, I had this crazy experience where I disassociated from my body. I had this crazy fever, and I remember going someplace that was really foreign and strange. And what was interesting to me was I wasn't afraid and I wasn't scared. And there were people there that I didn't recognize. And what I thought was really interesting to me, and I remember it, and you guys this might sound a little crazy, and it does to me to even say it, and I've never expressed this to anybody, not publicly or privately, but here we are on the internet, and I'm going to give this piece to you because I think it's interesting. Not only were there people, but there were like robotic animals, like robotic dogs that I can remember. And, now we're in the year 20, this was probably 1985, 1986 or so. Now we're talking about 2025. And in my own house, we have a little robot dog. And I remember seeing that for the first time when my kids wanted it and we picked it up. And I was like, oh, this is an interesting little robot dog. And that core memory kicked. And I was like, when I had that crazy dream when I was little, I saw this sort of thing that looked like this. So that was the first time that I can remember being away from my body and experiencing things that were not happening to me physically, but I knew that I was experiencing them for sure. Now, from there, I had many other interesting paranormal experiences that I can't explain. And I oftentimes, in my adventure in the last 8 to 10 years with dealing all of the paranormal and the ghosts and the scary stuff out there, I talk about this event that happened in that same house. Uh, I live in New Jersey. I'm close to the shore where, the bay overlooks, Manhattan. So I'm not far from, I'm about 7 miles from Manhattan across the water. So I'm right in that kind of area along the Jersey Shore in the armpit, basically. Okay. So, what is interesting to me is when I was little, I had this experience, and I'm going to reframe something that I've said before because I've been thinking about it more. When I was, probably about that same age, maybe 5, 6, 7 tops, I was, in my room. It was dark out. I was probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And I remember being kind of tired. And I was going through my He Man toy box. I remember very vividly. I even remember the smell from that. And I was going through my He Man toy box looking for something. And above the toy box was a window that looked out into the backyard. And the backyard was pretty big. And then there was another house. There was a fence, and then another house on the other side. And it didn't even face the bay, which is interesting. But what happened was I looked out the window and I could see the Statue of Liberty, right? And it was the Statue of Liberty for sure. Even my mind, I was like, that is the Statue of Liberty. Why can I see that in the backyard? That's so strange. And I remember being really excited about it. And I ran and I told my mom and my dad, I was like, I don't know how to explain this. I remember being little. I was like, I could see the Statue of Liberty from my room. And my parents were like, that's impossible, of course, because they know that there's no way that even though we're that close, we're still 10 miles and the wrong direction, and there's all kinds of things in the way. Impossible to physically see it. But my mom was cool and she placated me and she came, and I remember she like looked out the window and she's like, look, it's gone. And I remember in the years after that, I thought, well, maybe this was an angel or something. Maybe there was an angel talking to me, and my mind just said it was the Statue of Liberty, because what else could a 7-year-old who doesn't have a frame of reference for ghosts or angels or anything like that ever call something large, a large woman in the backyard, right? That was kind of ethereal and glowing and green. So I reframed it in my mind as, well, maybe that was an angel. But in the last couple of days, as I've really been thinking about my life and meditating on things, I thought perhaps I was accidentally remote viewing. And the vision was powerful because I was little and nobody was going to tell me no. and I was in a very creative mood. And I looked up, and perhaps some part of me just connected to that for some reason. Maybe there was something that I had seen earlier in the day. Maybe there was a a book that I read, or I went to school and they taught us about it, and my energy connected with that, perhaps. And then when I was just sort of in a meditative play state, very tired because it was close to bed, that I saw this and I remote viewed it. So, C Funk, um, what you're talking about is really cool, and we'll get to that. But please don't jump in, because this is an entire storyline of things and a realization of how things work. And I will talk about this with everybody, but I'm very well versed on the remote viewing protocol. Um, Brought forward by the CIA, Ingo Swann, and all of those folks. I'm very well versed in it. And the point of all of the stories is Scotty the medium, Scotty the remote viewer. These things are just titles. Just like you were saying, well, that's not it because it doesn't fit in the framework of what we called it. But the point is that it's just framework. It's just words for us to use. And what I'm doing is giving you the opportunity to remove the frame, move the door frame, remove the window frame, take all of that crap and push it away. Because once you limit yourself to how you experience things, you're not going to experience it all. Which means if I were to go over to my front door, if I opened it or somebody opened it for me and I stood all the way back here 20 feet away, I wouldn't see the outside world. I'd see my neighbors. I'd see my a telephone pole across the street, a lawn, my lawn, but I wouldn't experience the whole street. Not until I walked further to the door and I'd start opening the angle, right? Because that's what happens when you get closer. And then as you go out and you get to the door frame, you have a choice. I can experience the whole world by walking beyond this door frame, away from the safety of shelter and home, and experience things. It's the same thing with this, okay? So, when we are little, we don't have the door frame, it doesn't exist. So, this is how I'm explaining my connection to these things. The next part is when I was in kindergarten. I remember this very specifically. It was a very interesting thing. Um, the teachers had brought in what I kind of remember just being a big box, and it might have been wrapped up in like wrapping paper or tissue paper or something, but it had a hole in the top of it. And I think the idea was a sensory exercise. So for us as children to experience touching different objects inside of a box and kind of guessing as to what they were. I remember this happened, and this is a Catholic school, by the way. Um, so I remember them bringing the box in, and everybody was kind of going and putting their hands in and touching stuff and trying to guess what it was. There was like a car, a pine cone, and some other things in there. But I remember when it was my turn, I went up and I put my hand in and I touched something, and they're like, "Okay, what is it?" And I started describing it, and I was like, "I think it's a jacket, and I it's red, and it has like a ladybug on it." And I remember the teacher being like, "What?" And I this is she took the top off of the box, reached in and pulled out what was a shirt or a jacket. It was a garment. It was red and had little ladybugs on it. And she was like, "How did you know that this stuff was on there?" And I said, "Well, I could see it." And she said, "No, you couldn't. It was at the bottom of the box, and you didn't look inside. You just touched it with your hand." So I don't know what to tell you. So when that happened, they actually didn't let me go a second time. I wasn't allowed. And they were like, "Don't do that again," because it freaked them out. They didn't understand that I was perceiving things a little bit differently than they could. And throughout life, these sorts of things would happen to me pretty often. And it's the idea that until somebody said, "You shouldn't be doing that," I would just do it. But with the idea that all of the people around me could do the same thing, I was unaware that my teachers and my mom and my dad and my family members and my friends, I was unaware that they weren't experiencing life in the world around them the same way that I was. Now, another thing that had happened, and I'm going to tell this story. So if you've heard it before, it's okay. It's quick, but I'm going to reframe it. Okay. So if you've heard the story before, I'm reframing it now. Okay. So when I was probably about, I would say 7 to 8, still just right in that age range, really opening up to the world around me. I was outside in front of my parents' house, and I was on the sidewalk. It was a really nice day out, and this man walked up to me and he was wearing a suit and a tie and a hat. And thinking about it now, he looked like somebody from like the 40s or 50s. And he was walking towards me and he just stopped and he looked at me and I looked up at him and he started chatting with me, just making talk like, hey, how are you? Or do you live around? Those sorts of things. I remember talking to him. And then he was like, okay, have a nice day. And I remember he just like kind of did one of those things and he walked around me and left. And I went inside and my mom was like, who are you talking to out there? And I said, I was talking to this man. I described him, and she was like, there's nobody there. So for my lifetime so far, I had been saying, well, I guess I was communicating with a ghost. I guess I was communicating with somebody who was deceased. Now, let's take away the ghost and the deceased part, okay? Perhaps they were deceased, probably, because they were young and they were dressed strange. Let's reframe it as a part of remote viewing. So far, I've talked about removing space as a remote viewing ability. So the idea that something exists 100 miles away and you can describe it, space. It exists right now, space. But you can describe this object without seeing it from 100 miles away or better. Doesn't matter. Space, right? Let's take time and say time is something that you and I implement because society implements time and we use it as a way to manage our lives. So let's just say that time, for the sake of this, isn't a real thing. If you experience time blindness, put your hand up and say, just write time blindness down there, because time blindness is this idea that those of us with ADHD don't understand how much time we've spent doing something. 2 minutes in reality could be a whole hour to other people because we're not experiencing it the same way. Okay. So let's just say that out in front of my home, for a brief moment, I wasn't encountering a ghost or a spirit, but I was encountering somebody who actually lived in that space at a different time. And he and I encountered each other. And the reason he may have spoke to me as a child and he's an adult is perhaps, and he asked me, where are you from here? Do you live here? Perhaps he was walking a path that there was generally no children, or there was no children who looked like me. And I was wearing, you know, a bright, I think I had like a bright red and blue and green. It was like a very 80s jacket, jeans and modern sneakers on. And let's say this man encountered me and he was like, this kid is not dressed like everybody else is dressed. And he stopped to talk to me. And I spoke with him for a few minutes and he just was dismissive, maybe, like I was, like I was a ghost. And maybe he's telling that same story until the time he dies. He's like, I know I encountered somebody from the future. Or maybe he never talked about it because it was too scary or too unbelievable that he wouldn't want to mention it to anyone, right? So let's just think about those briefly as the idea of this remote viewing idea that we can remotely view things that are not only far away in space, but also in a distance far away from us. Okay. So, how do you guys follow this so far? This is to me one of the most interesting topics that I can cover that is within the realm of things that I have a lot of experience, but I have never really spoken about before. So, if you're interested in this, please, if you're watching this for the first time, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. I am going to make sure that I demonstrate remote viewing to all of you. I don't know if it's going to be tonight, but I have done it live before, and it's really, really interesting the way that it happens. Okay. So, a lot of people in the live comments have said that they have experienced time blindness, which is very interesting. Now, how are all of you feeling about my explanation of maybe are you okay with me reframing the idea of a ghost or a spirit with the idea of a different type of psychic phenomenon? If you're comfortable with that, just type yes down in the comments and let me know. And if you're uncomfortable with it, it's okay because I'm not trying to change your belief. I'm not trying to take a truth from you. I am simply explaining something in a different, the same thing in a different way in order to help us all grow and perhaps help us all understand our own lives a little bit better. Okay. So if you have something like that, let me know if you feel like that. Okay, cool. So Barbara says, what do you call it when you think it is one day, but it is days later? Is this like the other day just disappeared? So we call that time loss, and I would have to say that a lot of people who experience time loss to that degree may have some head trauma, or they may have some other things going on in their lives that they should speak with a doctor about. And it's not to say anything fresh, negative, or bad about you or anybody who might experience it, but to that degree, it is a little bit off. But to be honest with, and I live a very crazy scheduled life. Oftentimes I'm like, it's a weird Sunday, and my wife will be like, it's Wednesday, buddy, and I'm like, oh yeah, because I don't live my life because of my regular work schedule. I don't live a life where I'm like, well, it's the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I live a life of like, I'm off today and tomorrow, and then I work, 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 and then I'm off. So that my life is a little bit different in that experience. Um, so C Funk asks, have you had any success with forecasting the markets or sporting events with your psychic abilities? I have not, and the reason is because I don't care about those things, and it wouldn't bring me any pleasure in knowing those sorts of things. So I've never dedicated any time to those, which is going to bring us into our next thing where I have successfully used this ability to help with other stuff and how I experience it. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you were talking about, the framework of um, remote viewing, like the CIA controlled remote viewing, and then the more organic version of what I do. Okay. So the topic here is remote viewing and the paranormal, and then everyday uses. So let's say for the paranormal, when I first started doing what I do, I've told you many times that I would do photo readings. Somebody would hand me a photograph, and I would do a reading on that photograph and give them all the information that I could discern, not by what I'm seeing, but what happens when I touch it or connect somehow with it, the person, place, or thing inside of the photograph. Let's say that that photograph was just an intention and it really didn't matter what was in the photograph because the information that the person really wanted was the information that my intuitiveness was going to give them. So, the way that I learned what we'll call mediumship at the moment, the way that I learned mediumship was by accident for sure. Again, I'm not going to go over the story, but I didn't go looking for it. It sort of found me. And when I started trying to disprove mediumship, I was like, this can't be like a real thing because if I can do it and I have no skills in this so far whatsoever, I've never looked for it, it just sort of happened, then it must be a fluke. And probably um, it's not a real thing. So when I tried to disprove it sitting with people. I was, of course, a little bit afraid of what I was doing because I had never experienced it before, really like this. So I would mostly started through like the internet. I belonged to a private page on Facebook when that was very popular, and people would post pictures of their loved ones. And I would sit and I would just close my eyes and hold my thumb on the screen with the picture up, and all of this information would sort of populate inside of my, we'll call it imagination to make it easy for everybody to understand. It would populate inside my imagination, like trivia facts, or descriptions, habits, places, jobs. And what would happen is, or the place where the person passed away, what they looked like, if there were implications to it. So, what I would do is I would write everything without any barrier. No matter how ridiculous or far fetched it would sound, I would write it, or if I was actually physically sitting with somebody, I would expel the information. And to my surprise, I would say in the very beginning, somewhere between 80 and 85% of an accuracy rating would occur. Um, and I was like, well, I guess this is mediumship. I am connecting with people who are no longer physically here with us, and we are bringing facts forward about them. And it got really interesting because with my eyes closed and I'm tuned in, I can actually hear them here speaking with me, and they would tell me little tidbits, like you guys have seen me do live here on our readings, right? They'd give me little tidbits, and they'd be accurate tidbits to speak about. So I learned mediumship is not for me, and sometimes it's for spirits, and all of the time it's for the person sitting in front of me. It brings healing, it brings happiness, it brings them calmness and peace, which is super important to us because in life, when we experience loss, there's a lot of trauma. And when there is a lot of trauma and we feel that there's no place, there's pressure inside of us, and there's no place to go to heal because there's not enough crying or yelling or asking why. People look for help in ways. And maybe they go to grief counselors, maybe they go to church. Some folks find people like me, and we genuinely, folks like me, want to help those folks. So we do what we can for them. We give them this information, and it brings, most times, some healing and relief and some peace to them, which is the most important thing. So, with that, that's mediumship. Now, sometimes people say, my house is haunted. It's haunted. Can you help me? Sure. Don't tell me anything about what you think is happening in your house. Don't tell me anything about your house. Just the fact that you've told me that. Just sit still and let me do this. And I'll close my eyes and connect somehow very well with their house. Now, the first time that I did this was with a friend of mine. We were stuck at work, we were in a very boring detail, and he was talking to me about the paranormal and ghosts and stuff like that because people know that's what I do. So he said, and he was a non believer for sure. And he was like, well, what can you tell me? And I said, I don't know. Are you open to me just seeing like what I see if I close my eyes and concentrate on you a little bit? And he said, sure, go ahead. And immediately I'm transported into a house. And I remember this because it's like a memory for me. Even though I didn't experience it physically, I experienced it other places. So I went into this home, I remember, and there was a woman, and she was standing outside of her kitchen, and she was dressed a certain way, and I talked about her, and I gave him a name, and I said, there's a lot of interesting things inside of this kitchen. It's like this weird mustard yellow. And I said, what's really weird is there's like an octagon window from like the living room into the kitchen, which I've never seen inside of a house before. And he said, you got to stop, dude. You're describing my deceased grandmother's house and her. How are you doing that? And I said, I don't know. I'm just closing my eyes and connecting. And when I was inside of this space, she waved and said, tell him I said hello. And she used his name. And I said, okay. So I said, hey, she says hello to you, and she waves. And then she made some, I'm not going to dispel this, but she made some other personal references. And he was like, stop, because this is scaring me now, because this is stuff that you couldn't know. It's personal. There's no way you can know it about that strange window in my grandma's house and all the other stuff that I was telling him. He's like, there's no way you can know these things. So this to me, mediumship. But let's just rewind it a second and say, what if this is not mediumship? What if this is remote viewing? What if this is the ability to take your consciousness, your spirit, your soul, whatever you want to call it to describe it, your essence. What if you can take that and move it through space and time and give accurate information on things? What what would you use it for? Where would you go? Who would you experience or talk to? And what practical use would it have? So the way that after that happened, I said, well, a practical use for this, if I'm able to do this, would a practical use for this would be me being able to help people from a distance who have haunted homes, people who say their homes are haunted. And I do this all the time. They'll, um, I'm going to be always open and honest with everybody about everything I do. Most of the time, I do ask for photographs, but what I also tell them to do is say, send me photographs, and then do not tell me what's happening in your home. Don't tell me who's being affected, and don't tell me anything else. I just need a couple photos so that I can connect to that space and make it easy for myself to be able to walk through the space and understand what's happening. But even though I have this space, the physical picture of the area, Many times I run, if they are experiencing the paranormal or a haunting as they might feel like it, I will run into entities, spirits, ghosts, or shadows of things that did exist there prior. So the way that I help this is by connecting with those energies that are there, communicating with them somehow, and then bring that information to the client and saying, this is what I experienced. This is who I think is experiencing this in your home. And in order to make it stop, X, Y, and Z. And so often people are relieved because the information that I brought was not discerned from their photographs, but yet their experiences, the things that are happening to them in their home, are corro- corroborated, thank you, corroborated um, by them through just me talking to them about what I would experience if I was there. So we have pushed through space and time to get to a location mentally, to get there and do some work and come back and communicate that to the living. So that's how I decided that I would use my own ability to help people walk through their haunted homes from afar. And that's the way that I use it for the paranormal. For some of um, forms of this are easier. I will be sitting in people's homes and say, like, hey, I just want you to know that there is a very leaky pipe behind that wall and it needs to get fixed. And many times things like that, people are like, no, that's not possible. This is a brand new house. There's no leaky pipes. And then 2 weeks later, I got a call like, you know how you told us there was a leaky pipe? It wasn't exactly where you said, but it was behind there uh, in a different room. And it was a broken pipe to an HVAC system that just leaked everywhere. So that brought me confidence that when I was talking about these things, that I would be able to do this more often. Um, So, how do you guys feel about this? If you're watching this right now or on Team Replay, please do me a favor. Just remember in the description of this video, if you would like to become a fan or a super fan, we are have a lot of perks for folks that are fans and super fans. It's not just these discussions. You can hang out with us on Mondays and get our Monday affirmation. On Wednesdays, we do our mediumship and psychic development class, and I'm thinking about once a month we'll probably do some mediumship for just our viewers, okay, for our fans and super fans. And also, if you're watching this and you just want to come hang out with us offline in a different place, we have a Discord link. It's a brand new, fresh link right in the description. Hit that and come hang out with us. It's a safe place where we can talk about these sorts of things, and you will never miss a notification because it always lets you know when I'm live. Okay? I'm going to go back here and read some questions, and then I'm going to go forward a little bit and talk about more of this stuff. Okay? One of my daughters saw her grandmother's killer. I don't know that who she was saw until 5 years later. Then it hit me. Yep, that's a possibility. I'm sorry about your loss. I would check in my kids, grandkids. That's a good way to use it. I would send Scott a photo I took of an old haunted hospital. Caught some weird images. I could see that for sure. So remember, when I talk about remote viewing, it's not about what I see with my eyes. That, you know, so often when you guys see me here doing readings, my eyes are closed, and I'm doing them very blindly. It doesn't matter to me who's in front of me. I mean, you matter to me for sure. But what I'm saying is what you look like, where you're from, how you're dressed, your social status, all that stuff is completely useless to me. It doesn't matter with the way that this works. Um, so let's talk about. This is where you can put your tinfoil hat on if you like. This is where I think that things get interesting. The crossroads between the paranormal and the very rigorous way that the government has used remote viewing. So if you all want to like take a little note, I want you to write down this words, Project Stargate. Okay, write those down. Do a little deep dive into what that means. But I'm going to give you a brief history, and I'm going to talk to you about remote viewing, the rigorous standards that had to be met from them, and then the way that I do it, but that I have done both because I needed to test myself. So the CIA and perhaps some other three-letter agencies in our United States used this during the Cold War, remote viewing. They started a project called it was called Project Flame, I think, and then it turned into Stargate. Um, but the name of it is important. What is important is that there were Army intelligence officers, people with doctorates, and very high level government officials that okayed this project. And if you're familiar with a movie called Men Who Stare at Goats, that's kind of that. But that's, to me, one of those very silly takes on the whole thing. Okay. So, what's not silly is that these people were being tasked with using this psychic ability to spy on other countries, just like other countries were already doing to us. They were using people who had this psychic aptitude to look at our defenses and look at our things here in the United States. Okay. Bluebeam is a different thing. This one is called Project Stargate. Um, so what happens here is you get all of these collective people together, and they are very intelligent, they are very smart, and they have a high aptitude for being able to close their eyes and lock onto things that are far away from them in distance. And last night I told a quick story about a man who was doing this, and I'll tell you the rigorous protocol. I won't give you the whole thing, but basically this is the way that the rigorous version of remote viewing works. There's several different people that are involved for each experiment, and this is what they do. They have one person who would be the remote viewer. You know nothing about anything. Basically, you're in a room with one other person. The person that you're with is kind of your guidance. They don't tell you anything, but they ask questions. And in front of them, they have essentially a list of questions that are laid out with different sorts of who, what, when, where, and whys. Okay, they'll lay all of those things out, and they will say to. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So what they do is those are the two people that stay in a little room in an office, no windows, no decoration, table, two people. Here's the remote viewer and their guide who's going to help them get through this. They take a third person, and the third person never communicates with these two. The third person walks away, they go somewhere really far away. Could be anywhere, okay? And that person, once they get to where they're supposed to be, an agreed time, maybe they make a phone call and say, hey, I'm here. Then the remote viewer simply should close their eyes and say, okay, this is what I am seeing. I see um, what I think might be large waterfalls. I feel like there's peaks, there's a pool of water, there is greenery, and they would describe as much as they can. And while they're doing that, their guide, the person who's helping them in the room, will say, what else do you see? What else is there? Is there anyone there with you? And they'll ask those sorts of questions. And then they will write all that stuff down on the paper according to the diagrams and the things set out. And next, the person will return from where they were. They will come back, and a fourth person now will will say to the person who left, where did you go? And they'll say, I was, you know, next to Mount such and such, right next to the waterfall. And the judge will say, okay, let's see what this person wrote on their paper. And they will say, like, okay, they wrote peaks and valleys, they wrote waterfall, and they drew some peaks, and they drew some foliage. Is this where you were? Yeah, that's like really spot on as to where I was. And the judge will rate an accuracy score based on that stuff. So another way that they would perform remote viewing, as a way of the more spot, because that's just the test to see the aptitude of the person sitting in the chair, and the team. The other way to do this is they would take an envelope, and they would put maybe a photograph in the envelope. Maybe they would put a word in the envelope. Maybe they would put a coordinate in there, and then scramble the numbers. And the remote viewer would never look inside the envelope, but they'd be handed it and say, okay, these are all of the things that I am understanding, that I'm looking at as I am trying to lock into whatever this is in here. So that's the very rigorous version of, and it's the not a full explanation, because if you want to learn the full explanation, you can look up and download all those documents that are available. Um, but basically, that's the very rigorous version of it. Then there's the other version, and that's the way the trained people do it. Like, so if you went to California, you went to where they train people to do remote viewing, that's what you would learn. I've worked with one of those people, and our results were almost identical, which is really great for somebody like me who's not been trained. I just go based on my organic ability. Um, so basically, um, what happens here is somebody may hand me that envelope. Somebody might just say, um, can you tune into my house? Can you do X, Y, and Z? And I would just close my eyes, just like when I do a reading, and I would just explain out loud all of the things that I was seeing, feeling, and hearing. And I've trained myself well enough by now that I attempt to express in full detail all of the things that I'm seeing. And that will bring us to the next thing, which I think is really cool. Um, so see, so um, Paul Smith and Lori Williams. So Lori Williams is the person that I paired up with. I have it recorded, but I'm not allowed to release it because it has to do with a project that we're working on. And I don't want to put it out. But Lori Williams is the person who has been through all of that. She's a teacher of it. And basically, they handed her a target, and which is what we call the numbers inside the envelope. I got handed the same target, and we both landed on almost identical things. Her using her rigorous training, and me just doing the way I've always done it. So yeah, um, it is a really fantastic experience, and the more and more I am getting into what I'm doing now, the more and more I am just trying to bring these two worlds together and understand them in my own ability, and maybe help bring some of you into it as we're doing it a little bit better. Okay. So we'll talk about the next part of this here in a minute. Um, yeah, you don't want to have anybody have any judgments with any of these things. Let's see. Just looking through here. So if you're new here, welcome in. I am Scott. I am a medium and a psychic. We also are talking about remote viewing because that is something that I do very often. Um, and we are just going through the history of it. If you're on Team Replay, what's up? Nice to see you there. Thanks for being here with us. I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you're watching live, thanks for being here with us also. I know this is a little bit different from the normal topics that we chat about when it comes to the world of the paranormal, but I definitely like to make sure that our door frame is nice and open, and perhaps that the door frame doesn't exist because it makes it easier for us to operate. So from that, that's the way the CIA operates, and they have really interesting things. Now, I just listened to a podcast with a gentleman whose book I'm very deep into right now. And what he was talking about at the end of this podcast was somebody who was very prolific at this. He was a part of the program with the CIA, and unfortunately, he deceased under some suspicious circumstances, I guess. And nobody can confirm actually what happened to him. So the gentleman who wrote this book, Skip, he brought a photograph in an envelope to one of his colleagues who does remote viewing. He didn't tell them what the mission was. He didn't say, this is for this, that, or the other thing. He simply said, we're going to do a session. Here's your target in the envelope. Tell me what you get. And the first thing the man said was, this person, I'm locked onto a person, and they do the same thing that I do, meaning remote viewing. And he said, okay, where is that person? And he said, I think he's in a basement somewhere in Virginia, locked away behind some doors. And that was the last thing that this gentleman Skip asked. So basically, his friend who was deceased, there was a big controversy as perhaps he wasn't deceased, but stumbled across some secrets he shouldn't have using remote viewing and was simply made to disappear. Inside the envelope that he handed his colleague was a picture of the gentleman who was supposed to be deceased. And when he said, "This man does what I do, and he's in a basement somewhere in Virginia," that tracked really well with Skip, who said, "Yeah, probably." So I see a lot of folks who are talking about different sorts of things, and we're going to help out with this in a second here. Um, I see a lot of people talking of hi social moto, what's up? So basically, hi Faith. A lot of people are talking about healing and those sorts of things, which is really great. Um, it takes all of us to make this work. Specifically, right now, what I will talk about being for myself, being a healer with remote viewing, and then we'll move into the last part of this. So again, remember my framework for up to this point has really wholeheartedly been mediumship and psychic abilities, right? So let's say remote viewing. Let's take the mediumship aspect out of it and let's go to remote viewing, okay? The ability to move through space and time and see and understand things that are not right in front of you at the moment. So I was sitting with a woman doing a reading, and I went through the whole thing. And she was very pleased, which was nice. And then she handed me a photograph, and I'm going to tell this story. So I'm going to tell the story now, but then I'm going to make a long video about it, or not a super long, but an actual YouTube video about it because I think it's interesting. Because I don't have any medical knowledge beyond first aid. So this woman handed me this photograph, and in the photograph it was a sunny day, and there was like 4 or 5 women in the photograph, and they're all lined up in pretty gowns, and I think it was like for a prom or a wedding or something. And she's like, "Do you get anything off this photograph?" And it was neat because sometimes when people hand things to me, I almost feel like they're trying to trick me, which is silly because if if you're paying to sit with me, you're probably not trying to trick me into anything. But I felt nothing. I felt nothing. I didn't feel like anybody dead was coming through from there. I didn't feel any spiritual connection to it. But what happened was the woman on the end to the right, she was wearing a black dress or dark dress, and she was very young. And I said, "You see this woman right here? You need to tell her to go get screened for breast cancer because when I'm looking at her, I see black spots all up in her chest area. And that's how I perceive cancer." So she said, "Okay, I don't really know that girl. My sister is in this photograph, and she's like an acquaintance of that woman. But I will see what I can do about getting the message to her." So I think probably about 6 months went by, and I got a text message or a DM somewhere, and this young woman said, "Hey, my name is so and so. Do you remember doing a reading and telling a woman that somebody in a photograph should get screened for breast cancer?" And I immediately remembered it because it was very vivid to me. And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do remember that." And she said, "Well, I am that woman. Um, and I want to tell you that I think that you helped save my life. And not only mine, but my twin sister as well. We had not been screened for breast cancer yet because we're young. But as it turns out, in our family, our mom passed away from breast cancer, and we carry this genetic marker for it. And it's very like a very rare aggressive version of it. But we thought that we had time before we had to get screened. But thanks to you saying early that and pointing out, I she said basically like I got a little bit scared, and since it runs in our family, I had to go make sure. So she went and got screened, and she came up positive. And then she said to her sister, "You better go too, because if I've got it and we're twins, there's a good chance." And her sister went, and they both had the very, very early onset of it, and they were able to treat it, and they're fine. So that was one of my most interesting medical healings. I didn't do anything. All I did was perceive something and then give the information. Another time where something similar happened to this was I was at a party. I was doing tarot card readings. I was having a good time. And these people sat in front of me. It was a woman and her husband was one of these guys. And I was like, "Sir, I just want to let you know we're at a party. We're having a good time. I am the hired help here today. I'm the entertainment." But I was like, "But lighten up a little bit." He's like, "Well, I'm just sitting in front of you because my wife wanted to." So, okay, that's no problem. So I do my reading for the wife, and I looked at him and I said, "You know what? said, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but you need to go to the doctor because there's something very wrong with your heart. And he's like, I just was at the doctor like a month ago. I got a physical. I'm fine. And I was like, all right. I was like, I'm just telling you. And what I perceived was a heart, and it had all of these spikes going into it. And it was very strange. So I didn't understand what that meant. And the woman, his wife, was like, no, I will make sure that this gets taken care of. She very much believed me because of the tarot card reading that I had given her was pretty accurate, I guess. So yeah, within a couple weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, I get a message through Instagram, and she's like, I was at that party. You told my husband to get his heart checked. I begged and pleaded him, and I dragged him to the doctor, to a cardiologist. And as it turns out, he was immediately told to go right to the hospital because he needed a quadruple bypass immediately, or he was going to have a massive heart attack. So that was my healing, my way of saying, using that ability. So that is really one of those things that happens. So that's my healing. And maybe perhaps with some of you, if you reframe it, if you were not thinking so hard of it being a spiritual experience, but more of a truly metaphysical experience, an idea that you can perceive things beyond what is here in front of your eyes and in time, then you will be able to do this sort of thing more freely and easily. Um, so that's how I use that. Now, um, I got to thinking, what other uses could there be for such an interesting ability? Um, there's a lot of interesting things, and I will discuss those in our next episode of talking about remote viewing and remote viewing through the paranormal and practical everyday life. So, everybody who watched this, did you get anything from it? Do you feel that I covered things well for you? Did I leave you more confused? What do you think? Yeah, let's see. I had a dream that Christina says, I had a dream I was in one room, crawled through an opening in the wall, chasing my dog who happens to be deceased, was in another country. So that's, I think, I don't know if that's definitely remote viewing, but it's definitely the idea of it, to be in one place and go to another. Oh, right. So I wanted to go back to this other part real quick as you answer my questions. So the man in the CIA, or that was working with the CIA doing the remote viewing, after he said that his friend connected and said, about the man who was maybe deceased, the picture in the envelope says, he's working in a room in a basement in Virginia, or being held there, as that's where he is. He didn't ask any more questions, the man who brought him the envelope, Skip. And I thought to myself, why would a man who is so good at this and understands it so well stop asking questions there? And this is where my idea of the paranormal and this kind of mixed. Is it a scary thought that you can take your consciousness blindly, honestly, blindly, and put it in another place in another time and speak with somebody who's been deceased or is maybe deceased? For a scientist, is that scary? And did this man stop asking questions right then and there because he was afraid of the implications or the answer that you could, if you were very good at this, speak with the dead and get information from them that they shouldn't be giving? It's a very interesting idea, and that it all ties into other stuff that we can talk about another time. So if you haven't yet, make sure you go into the description of this video, join the Discord, and maybe if Wanti's still hanging out with us, maybe in the YouTube Discord, we'll make it um, just like a remote viewing discussion, and jump in there, talk to me about your ideas and the other stuff. Okay, that'll be really good. I guess we got stopped getting comments for some reason, which is okay. That is going to be it for me this evening. In the live, the chat has stopped, which is really interesting. But that's going to be it for me. I hope that you guys got something out of this. If you want to hear more about remote viewing, make sure you're here for when I announce that we're going to be doing it. I love these kinds of conversations and these talks and reframing the world around us for everybody to be included and understand what we're talking about and maybe tap into some of their own abilities without being so afraid of it. So if you haven't yet and you're new, make sure again you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share this video to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you like, and let's talk about the random orbs that just keep flying through this room. All right, everybody. Thank you again. I appreciate you again. I'm Scott. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I really love this conversation and this topic, and I hope that I can bring you more information and talk to you more about this practically, spiritually, and metaphysically. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Peace and peppermint.